Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new Urban AI conversation. This is actually the last Urban AI conversation of the year, and I'm truly happy and excited to do it with Lins Derry. Hi, Lins.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So it's really a great pleasure of having you, a true joy to explore this fascinating topic of embodied AI and embodied data. And this is a topic actually we will connect with our ongoing research on the Screenless City. So it's really like kind of a, in a sense, timely conversation. Linz, to introduce you, you are artist in residence at the University of Maryland College Park. You're also researcher at MetaLab, choreographic designer, and a professional dancer. And you will share it with us, but you've been leading several experimental research actually on embodying data through bodies, through movement, through dance. And it's really quite amazing actually to have the opportunity to learn more about your research in this field and to also understand how it might help us have not only a more ethical approach, but also a healthier and more joyful approach to data and artificial intelligence. So, as usual, we will first have a presentation, 20-minute presentation by Lins, and then we have a fireside chat, casual for the fireside chat. If you have like any reactions, comments, feel free to share them in the chat, and we might definitely react to them during the conversation. Lins, the floor is now all yours.
Okay, terrific. Oh, and can you see my slides? Okay.
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction. The title of my mini talk today is The Choreographics of Data. And wanted to mention that a lot of the ideas I'll be discussing today are from a paper that I am writing right now. So some work in progress ideas and looking forward to sharing them with you. But first, a little bit on my background and how I've ended up thinking about the choreographics of data. I have a professional background in contemporary dance and choreography and went to the Harvard Graduate School of Design to focus on design studies as well as interaction design. And when I was there, I was really struck with this idea of, or this question of how can choreography models pertaining to movement, space, and time be applied to the design of human-computer interfaces and data representations. And by data representations, I'm primarily speaking about data visualizations, but more so the experimentation that has flourished around data visualizations into areas of data sonification, data physicalization, and an area I'm helping to lead, data kinesthetics. And this primary research question that really was seeded while I was at the Harvard Graduate School of Design ended up manifesting in two directions. The first was focused on this idea of a choreographic interface. The term was borrowed or worked collaboratively on with Sydney Skybetter at Brown University, who coined the term and is the founder of the Conference for Research on Choreographic Interfaces. And I define a choreographic interface as one that increases the kinetic and spatial interactivity between humans and technological systems by integrating choreographic thinking into the design process. And here on the left, you can see a poster where I developed a choreographic interface that used very simple dance gestures in order to do conventional interactions such as zoom in, zoom out, scroll up, scroll down, but thinking about them very intuitively and full-bodied rather than just at the digital finger level. The other thread or the other thread of research that spun from that initial research question of choreographic design is data kinesthetics. And I first initially defined it as, or I'm sorry, originally I was using the term data embodiment, but since I'm leaning towards data kinesthetics because kinesthetics feels more specific to movement, and I define it as a communicative and artistic method that approaches the body as a choreographic medium to physicalize and perform abstract data. The image on the left of the screen is showing how working with a data set on environmental migration, which is when people are displaced from their homes because of natural disasters like wildfires and extreme temperatures. What I did with this data set was choreograph gestures to match the different disaster types, as well as developed a movement score for moving through the data set row by row so that it could be danced and performed. More along the scholarly or more along scholarly lines, yet still very much driven from my practice, I'm burning with this question now, which is, given our physical indivisibility from our data-driven world, how can performance practice and theory help us to navigate the complexities of abstract information and the issues it produces, extending to data representation or communication, surveillance, body politics, and democratic engagement? And this is really driven by me zooming out and seeing just the immensity of our lives being immersed in a data-driven society with data interactions constantly, and thinking more about these ways that my practice might connect to these broader issues. Thinking in these broader terms about how we interact with data in our daily lives, I see the body as positioned as either a sense maker of data, or the body is positioned as this informational subject where it's emitting data that can be read. Returning to this idea of body as a sense maker, an example would be how during COVID-19, you see on the news all these stats about COVID and these instructions to socially distance, and began to observe how that data, that information that I was taking in the news, was beginning to paint my experience while I was standing in line socially distanced at a grocery store, thinking, well, which 2% of the people around me might be infected with COVID-19, beginning to think statistically about my environment. Another example, the image on the right that's all orange, was living in California during, at the same time as COVID, crazy wildfires. So feeling this double quarantined experience of masked and then behind windows, because it was so smoky that the entire valley outside of the window from my home turned orange. It was very spooky. Maybe you recall it in the news. But beginning to look out the window, and I could see how my mind was perceiving the smoke and the orange as an emblazoned geographic map of where the fires were moving geographically, and envisioning this map out in my environment. Aram Sinreich and Jesse Gilbert wrote this wonderful book called The Secret Life of Data, and they describe this experience as algovision. Connecting to this next framing, body as an informational subject, this one may be a little bit more legible, but just in the sense of, as we are walking in our cities and our bodies are captured by CCTVs or facial recognition technologies and so forth, that the body has begun to be constructed in society as this informational subject, where our technologies are directed toward perceiving and classifying us as these data bodies. Um, so really what I'm attempting to set up here is this idea that data can move to us as we are sense makers, and data can move from us as we emit and express data from our bodies. And I like to think of this configuration as similar to Matryoshka dolls, these Russian nesting dolls. And I just love this GIF that I found this morning for the slides. I really wanted to add it in. Theoretically, following Marshall McLuhan, I argue the body is at the core of our media universe, nested in various sensorial configurations of touching and being touched, like Matryoshka dolls. So to conceive of any medium, including dance and data, as independent of the body makes no sense. They're intrinsically interconnected to the body and each other as networked media. And I probably should have began with the simple premise of McLuhan, which is just that all media are extensions of the body, are extensions of the body's sensorium. And because it's extensions, even money, which is described by McLuhan as media, because they are connected to the way we socially interact and organize our lives, that I could see data that way as well, especially in the previous examples I gave, where data is moving to and from the body. Returning now to art and design practice, I've found it useful to think about not only my work, but also others' work that I find deeply inspiring and worth sharing here in this presentation as falling into these three categories. But these three categories really work together as a triptych framework for triangulating the body-data relationship in performative settings. And by performative settings, I'm thinking of choreographies, of course, but also participatory experiences that may happen in museums or in civic spaces, as well as even online in digital spaces, such as in social media, where we use hashtags in order to connect to data systems. So since I'll read the little definitions for each area as I progress, I will move forward. But these three categories are encodings, decodings, and transfigurations. And I'll explain them with some examples next. Encodings have to do with translating abstract data sets into kinesthetic experiences, whether those kinesthetic experiences take the form of a performance or take the form of a participatory installation where people are able to really sense the data in their bodies viscerally. This connects to an earlier slide that I showed with the different disaster set or the different encodings for the environmental migration dataset. And now I'll properly introduce the project. This is Data Sensorium 1, Environmental Migration, a project I led at MetaLab at Harvard. And here is a screenshot of the choreographic interface used for the project. And at this moment, let's see, at the moment, the first line of the logarithmic movement score, shown top right, is activated. In particular, that line informs the dancer, Isabel Edgar, seen bottom right, to repeat the earthquake gesture 3 times before walking downstage 4 steps. These logarithmic values correspond to the 8 earthquakes in the dataset that internally displaced 984,564 people in the Americas region in 2014. You may be wondering what the data visualizations are on the left, and those visualizations were really my way of processing the data mentally as I thought of ways to visualize the data. It helped me think about how I might create this movement score as well. And it goes without saying the purpose of using these logarithmic values is because, of course, Isabel would not be able to take 984,000 steps forward on the stage. But it was a very simple movement score that then we developed into a performance where we began to take more artistic liberties with how the gestures were performed or how the steps were taken down the stage. Another wonderful performance example, or not another, I would say a performance example that has really inspired my work, definitely wonderful, is 100% City by Rimini Protocol. And here, this is a performance image showcasing the staging of Ish, and forgive the poor German pronunciation, translating to me on stage right and Ich nicht, not me, on stage left. And then during the performance, there were many questions and provocations asked of these actors on stage, but depending on the question being asked, the actors would move to whatever side most represented them. And this was but one choreographic method used in the performance to spatially organize the statistical data being embodied by the 100 actors. And to back up to say that the statistical data was taken from the city's census. Here, this looks like this was a performance in Berlin, but Rimini Protocol ended up staging this work all around the world. So different census data were used for the different performances. And the cast of 100 actors always came from the city. So very much a participatory performance project as well. Last, in terms of encoding, last example of encodings is A Sort of Joy, Thousands of Exhausted Things by the Office for Creative Research and Elevator Repair Service. And here is an image of the performance, A Sort of Joy at the MoMA, for 40 minutes. And let's see, I should probably explain it before I read the caption, but in the performance, the artists worked with the database and created a script for the actors to read from, and that also included different choreographic orientations in the museum space. So the only thing that the audience heard spoken were the metadata that was read from the MoMA's new digital database online. The next area I'd like to discuss is decodings. And in this column, decodings have to do with interpreting embodied movement through classification, machine learning, and archival systems. This one connects to the earlier idea that I shared about the body as this informational subject that can be understood. This is a classic example, an older work, but one that I find still extremely relevant. Improvisation technologies, a tool for the analytical dance eye. And here in Really, which is essentially now an online database of these lectures, this particular screenshot is for the lines section. And in this class of movement, William Forsythe explains, then demonstrates how a line can become a technology in improvisational dance. During the lecture demonstration, graphical annotations of lines are added to the video to help the viewer learn the concept. So in other words, the classification of lines are superimposed onto the video in order to really emphasize seeing or decoding the body as able to conceptually and physically produce these lines. A more recent project, the Movement Under Commons Technology as Resistance by Grisha Coleman, uses smartphone technologies or motion capture technology embedded in smartphones, to restate it more accurately, to capture movement portraits of vernacular movement vernacular movements such as plowing a field, or here we can see on the left of Abdul picking eggplants, or on right of Basma making baklava. But this database of these movement portraits really asks us to see uh, these movement vocabularies or choreographies as data rich and significant, bringing them to the forefront as something to value and appreciate. And not too different from Forsyth in the sense of his ask for us to value these abstract lines. The last category that I will talk about is transfigurations, having to do with shifting expected data outputs via performative interactions with AI and other informational systems, including non-digital ones. So really just this idea of like, can data actually be changed in the process of its embodiment? Can it be shifted? Can we have agency as we interact with it? And looking at time, I'm going to move through these ones quite quickly. Here is the choreographic interface that I co-developed with Jordan Kruger and a few other team members. This was also at MetaLab at Harvard. This connects back to the earlier slide where I showed those body gestures doing these interactions such as zoom in and zoom out. And we use the interface in order to interact with digital projects developed at the lab that were being shown on view at the Harvard Art Museums. But here, the body is being used to change the fidelity, to change the relationship of the data, and that has to do with the transfiguration, the altering of how it is we are able to step into this dataverse. And I'll end in terms of showing examples with my recent project being developed primarily at University of Maryland, College Park. This project is called The Data Twist. And here you can see participants playing the adapted Twister game. The quickest way to describe it is to actually share the, let's see. First step in this workshop is I ask participants to help produce a survey. And then the second part of the workshop is we use different movement games to respond to the survey questions. And you can see in the background, there's also a choreographic interface that helps to move, that helps us access the questions as well as the instructions for the various games. But here, this is the Twister game being shown here, and I'll read the instructions because it really will help land the project. Using the original Twister board as a map, the green circles signify strongly agree, the yellow circles signify somewhat agree, the blue circles signify somewhat disagree, and the red circles signify strongly disagree. Listen for the new body part and statement. Move that part to the color dots, signifying your level of agreement. And we have really serious to funny survey questions that participants put in, such as math is the color green, and you'll have to move your right hand, for example, to the dot correlating to your opinion about math being the color green. And by using this triptych framework to look at these various art and design projects, different methods emerge in the different areas, such as in encodings, methods for making abstract information more public, expressive, and social emerge. Or in the category of decodings, we can see methods for ensuring embodied data are filtered through choreographic, not just binary, referring to computers, meaning structures, meaning, and to amplify that in Grisha Coleman's work, prioritizing the making of baklava as being the important thing to turn our computer's attention toward, for instance, versus just the distance between the eyes for facial recognition. Essentially, this idea of methods for prioritizing what we see computationally through different choreographic and value lenses. And in the area of transfigurations, methods that I've begun to see come to the forefront have to do with changing the constitution of data and their meanings through subjectivity, performativity, and willpower, which becomes truly important when we think about how all this discussion of data can make people feel existentially quite threatened or not sure about how to take charge of the data we emit. So kind of see that this category as really being the most subversive and the one where our agency can really come forward. And perhaps this goes without saying, but though looking at art and design, broader issues and topics come up for deeper analysis and conversation. Um, Issues like in encodings around data representation or communication in the area of decodings, surveillance discourse, and in transfigurations human agency. So essentially just seeing how these categories have also helped me surface and pinpoint these different issues that I can discuss through the lens of art, which is different than discussing them through, for instance, critical data studies alone. And I am going to wrap here and say thank you and looking forward to having a conversation with Hubert now. And please do reach out and follow up with questions as well if any should arise. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, really, Lins, for the fascinating presentation. That was definitely a fascinating presentation, enlightening presentation, actually, on how data, digital, and AI could not only be screen-based, like, let's say, a digital thing, and we might discuss it, but something more like embodied. I might have actually a first question, which is really a kind of curiosity that appears as I was listening to like the different projects you shared, and I was really wondering how actually did you have this idea of merging, like data and dance? Can you share a bit of your academic or professional journey in this?
Sure. It was such a turning moment when I took a course titled Data Visualization. And when I took the course, um, it just occurred to me that making compositional or design decisions about encoding different data, whether it's through color as well as the spatial organization in the charts, was very much like organizing bodies on a stage. And then after learning about the experiments in areas of data physicalization, where, for example, a data set will take the form of a 3D sculpture, I thought, why not try to choreograph data? And it was a moment that I'm still running with, maybe 5 years later. So that was the origin of the irresistible desire to want to think about the choreographics of data. And something I initially began thinking, I don't know if anyone else will possibly be interested in this, but I just need to try.
Super interesting. Thanks for sharing. And actually, you mentioned several times this idea of data embodiment. If some of the viewers are interested, also we have on our YouTube channel some video from like designers, including Raquel Didro from Capable Design, Julia Zimmerman from City Lab Berlin, that presented related projects actually. So really feel free to have a look on this. I was also wondering, Lins, how do you approach the field you're building actually? So you're calling it data kinesthetic. Uh, is it something you believe is like you frame it as an artistic medium, or is it scientific? How do you approach it?
Hmm. So, wonderful question, and would give a shout out to colleagues, especially at the in Northeastern University at their Center of Design, there are some wonderful experiments in this space too. And at the moment, we're all sort of calling it different things that feel right and specific to what we're focusing on, but we do see there's connections. So you'll hear terms like research-based, research-based theater or data theater, socially engaged data theater, data somatics, data embodiment. So they're all there, but there are these connections. So in terms of placement, it very much feels like it can fall into performance research or most recently, I noticed Laura Pirovich, one of my colleagues I mentioned at Northeastern in this space, is focusing on positioning this research in human-computer interaction. I'm now interested in going a little bit broader and thinking about society and data as potentially a way to use this lens to think about even broader issues, as I was pointing to at the end. But in many ways, it's driven from the practice in my own work as at this intersection of choreographic design or choreography and data. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's so nascent and it's bubbling up, and I've noticed how we're as a group experimenting with placing it in these different fields. Yeah.
Um, thanks for sharing, Lins. And do you like see? Well, I don't like to talk about output in this, especially in this context, but how do you, let's say, envision in a sense the future of your field? Like, do you believe we might have, or you do this to have maybe new kind of artistic performance, in a theater, or not only theater, it could be obviously elsewhere? Or do you believe maybe, I don't know, industries could potentially, reuse such practice to create new interaction? Like, yeah, how do you see this?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And again, I'll sort of refer to what I'm seeing in terms of not just my own work. I could see this work thinking about the connection of embodiment and data as really supporting education, so data literacy. Um, Another area, I am located in Washington, D.C., and I'm in museums that are full of archives. So there's this pressing need in museum spaces to think about how do we make these archives accessible. And I've seen so many choreographic interfaces in these museums that are looking at bodies using machine vision to then make these connections to the collections. So I do see those interactions happening in museums right now where this work I could imagine can fold into that. And then this still feels very much connected to museums, but had a conversation with a professor at American University, Benjamin Stokes, and he leads the Playful City Labs. And he thought, oh, that the Twister project could be great, for instance, for city planners, like thinking about how you would engage a community around doing a survey about their feelings of on the urban design or the environment. So I can also see it as being a fantastic way to socially engage communities, in particular thinking around these survey projects. And then lastly, so I guess I kind of mentioned data literacy contributions being in museum spaces or other cultural institutions where we're helping to bring archives in an experiential way is important. Also, this idea of out in civic spaces where we're connecting maybe with data where we really want people's input and connection to. And then the last area is, of course, in theoretical applications and thinking about the body as an information medium. It can help us explain what it means to be in contact with our phones that are also reading us, and maybe bringing some more critical dialogue to surveillance discourse and so forth through that theoretical lens. Yeah.
On this topic, how do you see actually the body? And I'm asking this question because indeed you shared in your presentation, in a sense, the counter vision or alternatives you're building to think the body through medium a surveillance medium, or like maybe as Foucault
Mm.
framed it, like when he was saying the body is like kind of surveillance medium, and obviously you're proposing something very different. So I'm really wondering, like, how do you define or how do you see the human body?
Yeah, I really see the body as this interface where data is coming in and out. And then it occurred to me that that data is a representation and is very abstract. And can it actually go in and out? But I think it can, and I'm working on this here. But to really answer the question of how do I see it, I really do see this interface where data are moving in and out and having these visceral effects or communicating information as this medium. But I also see it as a medium that is rife with failure and distortion and glitch because it's not like a blank piece of paper. We have the soul in the body, and we have the subjective dweller who can shift meanings with will. And for instance, we have perceived identities as well as our identities that we hold, and gender pronouns are a great example, right? In the sense that we sometimes have to communicate how it is we choose to be perceived versus maybe initial perceptions. Um, I suppose what I'm trying to say is I see the body as this interface for data to go to and from it, so as a medium, but also as a complicated one. And this complication is also wonderful because this is where we can maybe get resistance and get friction and uh, be able to harness the aesthetic universe of like an artistic practice in order to mess things up in a helpful way. I don't know quite how to say it succinctly, but yeah, I can see it scientifically and then also aesthetically. Maybe that's a good way to put it. It's both. Yeah.
Would you have a recommendation, let's say maybe individual or institutional recommendation to individuals eager to activate this definition you're sharing, this vision of the body as an interface, which is an amazing and beautiful definition. But I was also thinking maybe some people might be during an entire day behind a computer, and like that might not feel in a sense their body. And what you're doing, I believe, also with your project is activating the body and incentivizing like another interaction with just technologies. But yeah, what recommendations maybe would you share on this?
Mm. So the just so I think I'm following would be the recommendation of for the person who's behind the computer or the recommendation for like a
Exactly.
classroom?
I'm
Yeah,
actually
okay.
asking this question, and it's bridging with the Screenless City because we've been working a lot, like on the Smombi. So the Smombi, it's a suitcase word between smartphone and zombie to designate people that are so glued to their screen
Mm,
that they no longer see their environments actually. And so this is really like a kind of body in a sense that interests us a lot, and
mm.
those people, the movies, they really have a kind of disembodied interaction with the reality. So that's why I was really wondering, in a sense,
Mm.
from your perspective, what can be done with such, let's call it body in a sense.
Yeah. A part of me thinks the design is so important, right? Because if we must get our work done through these technologies where the cloud is behind,
Mm,
so to speak. It's difficult to overcome that, which is why I'm excited as a designer to be designing these embodied experience. So
mm,
I suppose in some regard we need more designers
mm,
thinking about embodiment in a deep way. And with that said, for instance, two projects that I shared very briefly, the data sensorium one, dancing the data set, though I showed this choreographic interface, it wasn't needed in the actual performance. It was something that was supporting the development, but ultimately it ended up just being a dance of moving through a data set. And then similarly, with the data twist project with the twister board, there's the interface there, but we actually don't even need it. We have these dance games where we're moving through a survey, and that's all that's needed. I've been surprised by that. For both of those projects, when I wrote grant proposals, I was imagining all this technology and this immersion. And then when it actually came to the execution, it wasn't needed. And I think that as designers, to be able to be okay with that, to be able to like let the screen go in the
Yeah.
design process, and to discover that the design of experience, and we can even um, s- still be touching upon something so digital like data without even having the digital present. And that's pretty fun. Or to have it like in the background, for instance, in the background in these choreographic interfaces that are playing supportive systems, but they don't need to be the center of the attention. Yeah.
That's super interesting what you're sharing, because when we are, discussing embodied AI, we might have in mind very advanced robotics or kind of high technologies. And you're sharing here another way actually of embodying AI through our bodies. So in a science kind of low tech or frugal, very frugal technology, actually.
Yeah. Perhaps there's a way we're trying to problem solve on the spot here, but in designing these experiences, by first connecting to the questions through the body, we may be pleasantly surprised that we are able to drop the screens. And I suppose that that's my conclusion after hearing myself go on a little bit of a rant here, that there is a way to think of embodied AI, and perhaps it's by starting with embodiment first and foremost, and then to see if the screen is even necessary.
Just to be sure, because it's indeed very, very important what you shared, and to have well understood, you're
Mhm.
saying that as soon as you start approaching technology from a human perspective, body perspective, you kind of saw that screens was not maybe were not as necessary as they are today. Is it what you mean?
Correct. Or right. Maybe I can't. Yes, correct. So I suppose, like, kind of, now that I've thought through this a little bit more in my answer, um, yes, I think beginning with the design process, being deeply embodied, can help us migrate away from our screens to find new ways of engaging with, specifically in my case, information, right? Or information technologies or information at museums. That there's a way that it can be done complementary, where then the screens maybe are more complementary than they are driving the experience.
Okay, so
Yeah.
really kind of approaching, let's say, the citizen, the user, also as a body, not only as a mind. Or okay.
Yeah. I suppose context is important, because what I'm thinking here maybe doesn't apply to everything, but uh, the main thing that I've been designing for is this idea of information, or information communication, or data literacy. So at least in this area, this feels like a possibility. Yeah.
I was recently reading a fascinating book. It's called Dancing in the Street. That's really a, a, a great book. And the book is basically explaining how we came up with today's societies, where, in a sense, we are less dancing. And what the author means by this is we are less using our body, because gradually, through puritanism, through capitalism, all kind of public celebrations, festivities, ecstatic rituals were repressed because not seen as efficient. I'm really trying to synthesize,
Mhm.
but that's the main idea. And so I was really wondering, and I wanted to ask you this question as I was reading this book. How can we bring back more, let's say, embodied interactions in the daily life? Like, Is it, or do you even believe it's possible to bring back this kind of, let's say, dance in the street?
Yes. Oh, I feel like it connects to my last reflection was like if the work we're being asked to do has been set up to be mediated through our computers and phones, it's so difficult to really have this embodied experience unless we're designing embodied experiences. There, finally said it. uh, an experience I recently had, though, where I discovered it is possible was motherhood. And when I had my child, I couldn't be on my screens. And I became deeply embodied and playful again and discovered Washington, D.C. in the most unbelievable way ever because I just would put Finley into the stroller. We would leave the home, and I had no idea where we were going, but I knew I couldn't be inside the house with an infant all day. And we would just go places and just discovered like how welcoming a city bench was in order to breastfeed and how needed that space was, or I just saw space and my environment so differently. And I guess the only way to maybe pass that along to others so that we can dance in the streets more and enter our civic spaces, our museums, to sit on park benches, to meet other people and to have that communal experience is partly by what I think you're pointing to, which is needing to culturally shed a little bit of this need to be productive all the time. And that was really difficult for me during those first few years with my son because it's just like I had to be okay with not being productive all the time because my entire life ended up being like this because the only way I could be productive was on the screen. So I guess a part of it is a cultural shift in support of the book you read. And not sure exactly how to do that. It was sort of forced upon me through motherhood, but it was unbelievable, and I wish I could pass that experience, on to everyone, should it be one that they desire. But what do you think, in terms of how to make that cultural shift so people can move back out into the city, in this physical, playful, and wonderful way?
Well, we're really kind of actively working on this as part of the Screenless City. And one
Mm.
of our area of reflection is very close to what you shared, is
Mm.
by creating experiential rooms. So, kind of experiential bubbles when basically you can connect again, as you did maybe here with your children, with this idea that it's totally fine to slow down and to enter a new space time in a sense. So actually, it's quite aligned indeed with your conclusion.
Oh, great. Yeah, right. Like having a place to go. I don't think I ever realized how how important it is to have these places, right? Or to have a place in museums that are age appropriate for,
Mhm.
yeah, age appropriate places, and what that means to have accessible experiences for people in different places in their lives. Yeah.
Are you aware of big techs, or let's say companies that well integrate the body in their design? And I mean by this, either by having potentially professional dancers or choreographic designers, in their design team, or because you saw that the final result was actually very well adapted for, let's say, a kind of body interaction. Is it a kind of trend you're seeing, or not really?
Mm. I do have one friend who's outstanding. Her name is Laura Bedell, and maybe this is someone you can talk to in the future. But Laura Bedell has a background in dance, but is also a designer. And it was truly terrific because she was on a Google team. I think it was called the ATAP Google team, if I'm recalling right, where she was working on gestures to connect to like a radio sensor on the phone. What's Google's phone? The Pixel phone. And so she was designing the gestures. In many ways, you can frame this as a choreographic interface in a similar way to how I was using machine vision in that museum example. So yeah, I think that's a beautiful example of seeing someone with this dance experience then move in toward this choreographic design role, but out in industry, making a real impact.
Amazing. Thanks a lot for
Mhm.
sharing, Lins. And well, maybe last question, as I see the time flying. You were sharing that you are working on a paper,
Yeah.
and thanks actually for sharing some kind of early insights. Do you agree maybe to share like the topic of your next or your, let's say, your ongoing research on, yeah?
Yeah. So some of those ideas were quoted, and I realized I didn't want to get in trouble for plagiarizing myself in the future. So I said, I think if I say I'm using these work in progress ideas, I'll be covered. So tentatively titling the paper The Performative Body as an Information Medium. And so you can keep your eye out for that. It's currently drafted around 20 pages. And largely to an earlier question you had, trying to think about where I might want to actually drop this in terms of which field,
Mm.
where to put it, because it is such interdisciplinary work, and knowing where to publish one's work in order to reach the right audience is a challenging one. So I have this paper drafted, was happy to share the ideas with you all today. And when I do figure out where to publish it, I'll let you know. So maybe we could put it in the show notes, or people can find it. But yeah, really wanted to think about this in a little bit of from a theoretical perspective,
Mm.
and that's what was driving my fall research. And then moving forward in the spring, we'll be developing more the data twist project, thinking with students at the University of Maryland to really make it a truly participatory project.
Amazing. Well, thanks a lot, really, Lins, for sharing your research, for this very inspirational, very inspiring discussion. It was great to see some way of having a more embodied, intentional approach to artificial intelligence. That's already the end of this conversation, which was actually the last conversation of the year. And I think it was really an amazing way of ending this year. Thanks again, really, Lins, for this fascinating discussion. Thanks to all of you for actively following the Urban AI Conversations. It was already the 46th episode, actually, and we will start again next year. But before this, we'll have a kind of pause, a kind of break. So I wish to all of you a wonderful resting end of the year. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lins.
Thank you.